Hi everyone, this is Ryan coming to you today to talk about time ownership, time management. How do we get what we want out of life? And this is one of my favorite topics for that very reason. It's the heart of everything we do. We can get anything and everything we want from our lives based on how we manage our time. And I talk to people sometimes, and the problem is that they're just not a doer. They'd rather sit on the sidelines and just watch life pass them by. But you're watching this webinar, so I'm assuming that's not you. So you're a doer, but what do you do? I found myself in that position many times, and it seemed like every Monday morning, this is how I started the day. It seemed like I was just in a constant reactive firefighting mode. It's like everything was coming at me at once. We definitely don't want that to be the case. So if you came here today and you feel like this is your day some days, well, you're in the right place. We're going to talk about how to solve these problems. But you may say, Ryan, what expertise do you have? How do you know anything about time management? Well, there was a time in my life where this was an absolute necessity. I couldn't have survived without managing and really owning my time very well. At that time, I owned and ran 3 different companies. I had 2 very small children. My wife worked full time. I was on our Chamber of Commerce board and various committees. I was on a board for a nonprofit bank. My wife is Catholic and I'm not, so we go to her church and my church every week. I'm on the board of my church and run the audiovisual. I also attended several different peer groups, and each of those peer groups met regularly in person. I traveled a lot for work and occasionally for pleasure. And then, my wife and I built this great house out in the country, but my front yard is about 10 acres. So between all the yard work, I had a lot going on. So it was not optional for me to learn to manage my time. It was an absolute necessity. And, back in that time period, I would oftentimes catch myself saying, I just don't have enough time. And in fact, so much so that even now, I hate to hear people say that, because I said that for a while. But, time is really the great equalizer. We all have the same amount of time. Sometimes talking to friends and clients, I say, hey, what do you have in common with this guy? That's right, this is Bill Gates. What do you have in common with Bill Gates? Well, you both have 24 hours in a day. The difference is, what is he doing with his versus what are you doing with yours? He's one of the richest men in the world because he spent his 24 hours a day wisely. So how do you spend your 24 hours every day? Well, that's what we'll be talking about today. And the secret is not to just cram more stuff into every day because you'll keep saying, hey, I just don't have enough time. I like this saying. It says, instead of saying I don't have enough time, try saying it's not a priority and see how that feels. Because that's really the secret. We have to prioritize. We have to focus. We cannot do everything. I love Warren Buffett saying, he says, yes is a very expensive answer. That's why you should say no most of the time. So we have to know what to say yes to and what to say no to. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on. But as I really started to dive into time and time ownership and time management, one of the first things that really jumped out at me was a study in the 1970s by Harvard, and they were looking for keys to success. They were looking for traits or characteristics that people shared or people had that led to ultimately their success. So they started measuring children as early as 3 or 4 years of age, and then they followed these children for the next 30 years. And what they found was that, yes, there is one single trait that is a predictor of future success. And so what was that trait, you may ask? That trait was long time perspective. So what they did in these children, they would put a child in a room with a table and a donut. And they would film him and they would say, okay, if you can wait 3 minutes, we'll give you a second donut. So if you can go 3 minutes without eating this donut, you can have a second one, and then you can do whatever you want with them. Well, the children who couldn't wait, that just ate their donut, that was instant, immediate gratification, they had their one donut. The children who could wait for 3 minutes got 2 donuts and then could do whatever they want to with them. Well, those children that could wait 3 minutes before eating their donut, they followed all the children, and those children turned out to be the most successful long term. And again, it all boiled down to this long time perspective. In other words, if you were in high school, if you were in college, and when I went to college, Thursday was the big party night. So if you had a big test on Friday, but yet you got invited to a big party on Thursday night. What were you going to do? Well, someone with a short time perspective would say, man, I'm hitting that party. Someone with a long time perspective would say, well, I want to own my own company, or I want to be an engineer one day, and that means I need to graduate with good grades, and that means I need to pass this class tomorrow with this very important test. So someone with a long time perspective may decide to stay home and study, or maybe go to the party but leave early so they could get a good night's sleep. So think about that. Think about how the decisions you make today, what you are today is a product of what you did yesterday. And where you'll be tomorrow is a product of what you do and what you think about today. So if you want a different tomorrow, if you want a better future, let's change what we do today. So that's what we'll talk about. So it brings us to a great topic, what to do versus how to do it. There was a time when I thought the answer was just getting more stuff done. And I was a master of to-do list. I could get work done. But it didn't always mean I was reaching my goals any faster. And what I learned was I could be efficient without being effective. So you may say, Ryan, what does that mean, effective versus efficient? Well, I was in Albuquerque recently. My wife and I were there for a long weekend visiting some friends, and we wanted to go to the top of this mountain. It's called Sandia Peak. And so we got up early that Saturday morning, jumped in the rental car, punched it into the GPS, and we started driving. It was early in the day. There was very little traffic. Had a tank full of gas. We were getting great gas mileage. We were talking, having a good time, and we could see the mountain coming up in the distance. And as we continued talking, we were following the GPS, kept talking, making great time, and all of a sudden, I looked up and I noticed the mountain was in our rearview mirror. I had followed the GPS, but it had sent me in the wrong direction. So while I was going along fine, I was making really good time, there was no traffic on the road, I was being very efficient, I wasn't getting to my destination. In fact, I was going the opposite way that I needed to go. So I was being efficient, but not very effective. And that's what we do sometimes with our lives. We get more things done. We focus on productivity, but we're not moving towards the right goal. If we don't know where we're going, like Yogi Bear said, if we don't know where we're going, we might not ever get there. So how do we know where we're going? At the end of the day, it boils down to why. What is your why? You've got to find your why. Why are you doing what you're doing? You can have a goal that says you want to have $1 million in the bank. And while that goal might motivate some people, it probably won't be enough for most people. But if you describe your why behind that goal, for example, if you want to have $1 million in the bank so you could buy your parents that dream home they always wanted but never could afford, that's a much more powerful why than just saying, hey, I want to have $1 million in the bank. So you've got to define and find your why. So when it comes to business, one of my very favorite tools, and of course, I'm an EOS implementer, the Entrepreneurial Operating System. So I fell in love with this system so much I devoted my life, my career to it. But at the heart and soul of the Entrepreneurial Operating System is what we call our EOS model. And it's really all about helping us find our why. We always talk about vision, we talk about traction, and you need both of those things. When it comes to vision, one of the first things I love to talk about with clients is what we call the Vision Traction Organizer. We've all probably had to write business plans. I think I wrote my first business plan 20 years ago. It was this massive 66-page monstrosity. It was beautiful, but it was absolutely useless. I think it sat on my shelf for 10 years without me even cracking the cover. It just collected dust because I didn't understand the concept or the reason. I didn't understand the why behind business planning. So in EOS, in our EOS world, we break the business planning process down into 8 simple questions we call the Vision Traction Organizer. So this is a great way to start off finding your why. We start off with our core values, but then we jump into our core focus. So our core values, that's who we are, kind of our DNA. But our core focus, that's really our purpose, our cause, our passion. That's the why. That's the why. Why do we do what we do? So once you find your why, the rest of your life can get a lot easier. So once we find our why, our purpose, our cause, our passion, we can use that as a filter, again, to know what to say yes to know what to say no to. And then the very next thing we work on, one of my favorite things, is a 10-year target. That's that mountain in the distance that we're aiming towards, because we need to know as a company where we're going. Because once we find out where we're going, we can get everybody on board, everybody rowing in the same direction, and it's like magic. When that happens, when everyone's rowing in the same direction, you will get there faster. But then once we have that 10-year target, how do we get there? Well, we start that with our marketing strategy. We work out our marketing strategy, then we jump into a 3-year, because that 10-year is exciting, it's way out there, but it's hard to relate that 10-year target to what work I need to be working on today. It's a big mental gap to jump. So our 3-year picture starts helping us bridge that gap. Once we have our 3-year, we flip the page to the other side of our vision traction organizer, and we can make a great 1-year plan. Once we have a great 1 year, we can turn that into a 90-day plan, and that will help us determine what do I need to be working on this quarter, this month, this week, today. So it's a beautiful process going from 10 years to 3 years to 1 year to 90 days to now. So the vision traction organizer, it's beautiful. It works great for your business, helping you find the why for your business. We also have a family version of this, a personalized version, to help you find the why for your personal life, your family, because you need both. You need personal goals, you need business goals, and these tools are great for that. So if you want a copy of the family plan, shoot me an email. I'm happy to send that over to you. Another tool that we can use, again, to save time, one of my favorite EOS tools is a scorecard. With a scorecard, we can track what are we doing. Are we on track to our goals? Are we managing our day-to-day? Is the business running well? So a scorecard is another good time-saving tool that I found very helpful. So Jim Rohn, one of my favorite guys out there. He was a great motivational speaker, a great self-development speaker. If you've never read or listened to a Jim Rohn book, I highly recommend it. In fact, I recommend right now, if you've not listened to Jim Rohn, download Audible on your cell phone and get some Jim Rohn books. They are awesome. Jim Rohn also had a great process for kind of goal setting personally. So talking about the Jim Rohn model, he said, pick the main areas of your life. For example, personal side, the spiritual side of your life. Physically, exercise. Everybody knows you need to exercise more, exercise better. Rarely are we doing it. So list that part of your life. The family and social part of your life. Economic, where do you want to be financially? Kind of career and business. And then finally, lifestyle. And then let's start listing some time frames. Write 1 or 2 goals down for each of these items in the 1-year time frame, and the 3-year, and the 5-year, and the 10-year. And what you'll realize is that just by simply writing these things down, you are 36% more likely to hit these goals. And I'll tell you, I did this the first time years ago, and what I found is that I was knocking out 3-year goals in 1 year, and I was hitting 5-year goals in 3. I was getting more done than I ever imagined. Business profit just went through the roof. Personal goals, my wife and I had always wanted to travel more. We had some friends in Singapore that had invited us over for years. We put this on our list, and it seemed like within a matter of months, we were sitting in Singapore. So just the simple process of writing these things down, it's been shown that you're 36% more likely to hit a goal if you write it down. You want to take it a step farther? Write it down and then tell someone. Add that extra accountability, that accountability partner, and that 36% increase jumps to 76%. So if you really want to make sure you hit these goals, write them down and then share it with somebody. Share it with a business partner, an associate, a friend, a spouse, because that will increase your chances dramatically of hitting these goals. So I love this process. I've done it myself several times. I redo it every year, and I'm always happily surprised at how fast I'm hitting my goals. So start with this, and we'll focus, and we'll work on what we need to be working on right now at this very moment. So again, we're talking about finding your why. It's not, we can't jump into just doing more stuff. We've got to make sure we're doing the right things, and that starts with finding our why. So another favorite quote of mine from Henry Ford, it's been my observation that most people get ahead during the time that others waste, and that's true. Trust me, even people that say, Ryan, I don't have any time, and I hear clients say that probably on a weekly basis, I don't have enough time. These same folks have plenty of time to watch TV, plenty of time to surf the web or to hit social media. So it's time we have, but what are we doing in that time? Are we wasting time? And if so, could that be time that we use to get ahead? I heard a study years ago and I believe this was in Japan, they measured the productivity on workers, for workers on assembly lines. And what they found was that an average assembly line worker, for example, watched about 15 hours of TV a week. The foreman for those lines watched a little bit less, watched about 10 hours. Managers watched about 5. When it got all the way up into VPs and presidents, they were watching less than an hour of TV a week. This was no accident. The people that were getting ahead were not wasting their time. So imagine, how much time do you really have to spend, and could you be using it a little bit wiser? And listen, I'm not the fun police. I'm not trying to make you stop having all the fun. But just think about your goals. What's more important? Kicking back, watching a little YouTube videos, or actually making some progress on your goals? Speaking of time and making progress on our goals, all time is not created equal. This is something that took me a while to understand. Everybody kind of has their time sweet spot. For example, I've historically been a bit of a night person, and so I seem to be very productive at 8 or 9 p.m. Everybody's not like that. You need to find when you're most productive. Most people, it turns out, are more productive in the morning. So if you don't know when you're most productive, start testing it out and start with the morning, because just statistically, it's more likely that you're more productive early in the morning. When you find that time, make sure that you're using that time wisely. If you find that you're most productive at 9 a.m., make sure you're not checking email at 9 a.m. Do something high value, like work on your long-term goals, work on things that will move you closer to those big targets out there 5 years, 10 years down the road. Don't waste that time responding to email, checking voicemail, doing things that are low value. So when you find your sweet spot, make sure you're using it wisely. Back to that, not all time is created equal, kind of being a morning person. Another favorite saying of mine, he that would thrive must rise at 5, and he that has thriven may lie till 7. So again, you got to get up. I have, over the last few years, started trying to make myself more of a morning person. We'll talk about that a little bit more. It seems like I am becoming more productive earlier in the day. As I shoot this video now, it's 10 p.m., so I still like to think of myself as a night owl as well, but I'm becoming more of a morning person, and we'll share some tips on how to do that. You know, one of my favorite Mark Twain quotes was, if your job's to eat a frog, it's best to do it first thing in the morning. And this is another reason that I've started trying to transition to become more of a morning person. Go ahead, come into the office early, hit the ground running. You know, I used to come in, if I had some hard tasks to do, maybe I had to call a client and I really didn't want to do that, I would procrastinate. The next thing you know, it's 3 p.m., 4 p.m., and by that time I said, well, you know, I'm supposed to call client A, but it's 4 p.m. They're probably already gone for the day. I'll just wait and call them tomorrow. And so I've dreaded the task all day, and now it's the end of the day and I procrastinated. That means now I'll dread it and think about it all evening, and I'll come in tomorrow and probably start the vicious cycle all over again. So it's just mentally dragging me down, and I'm not getting the goal accomplished. If I come in and I knock out this hardest task first thing in the morning, then I get a little bit of boost, because I know, wow, I've already been productive. I've knocked out my toughest task first thing in the morning, and I have the rest of the day to keep working hard. I kind of get this mental high first thing in the morning. So if you have some hard tasks to do, stack them up early and knock them down. Don't start your day checking email. So do your hard task first. With that in mind, one of my favorite books, the book that really helped push me down this road, is a book called The Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod. Hal studied and interviewed dozens and hundreds of uber successful people throughout the world, and what he found was some similarities. One of the biggest similarities was that on average, these uber successful people woke up and got their days started about 3 hours before they had to be at work. So for example, if their workday started at 8, they'd be up and at 'em at 5. If their workday started at 9 a.m., they'd be up and at 'em by 6 a.m. So you may say, well, what in the world would I do in 3 hours? Well, I'm glad you asked. Hal kind of put together a list of what most of these successful people were doing during their morning routines. So the first thing is that they would meditate. They would pray. They would spend a little time in silence. Just kind of help center themselves. This gives you a chance to think. This gives you a chance, again, just to be quiet for a minute. That's really good to do early in the morning when it's quiet. The next one was affirmations. You know, if you've ever read Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich, one of maybe the most successful business book of all time, Think and Grow Rich, It talks about the power of affirmations and positive thinking, positive speaking. So that's another great thing to do early in the morning. And surprisingly, it was something most of these successful people did. The next is visualizing, thinking about where you're going, thinking about how you're going to get there, your big goals, your big dreams. Then exercise. We got to get the blood flowing, got to get some movement. And again, I used to work out late at night, and I found that when I switched that to early in the morning, my days seemed to be running better. We'll talk about exercise a little bit more later on. We'll come back to that. Then they read. Successful people spent time every day reading. So they've shown that people that typically would consider themselves less productive or less successful said that on average they read less than one book a year, whereas people that considered themselves successful read on average 12 to 50 books a year. So read, spend some time. Even if you read 10 minutes a day, you're making progress. You're reading. We'll talk about reading more a little bit later as well. And then lastly, what were these uber successful people doing during the morning routines? They were writing. They were journaling. They were spending time thinking and putting that thought to paper. There's some power in that as well. So if you've never tried journaling, check it out. There's actually a great Audible recording of a Jim Rohn book on journaling. I think it's 45 minutes long, so it's a very easy read. Talks about the benefits of journaling. So if you've never journaled before, check that out. So that's the Hal Elrod book. And the nice thing about the Hal Elrod book, The Miracle Morning, if you read the book and you say, Ryan, I want to start getting up earlier, but I just don't know where to start. Again, there are great tips in that book. They even have an online community. You can get online and search for other people who are just reading the book now, and you can pair up with an accountability partner, and you can call or text each other at your chosen time in the morning. Again, accountability helps. So if you need a little bit of extra oomph to get out of bed in the morning, find an accountability partner, and you can do that on the Miracle Morning website. So this guy is Charles Schwab. You may not recognize the face, but you'll probably recognize the name. So Charles Schwab, one of the most successful American industrialists in the 20th century. In fact, in the early 1900s, he was the richest man in the world. And at that time, when he was kind of growing, when he was becoming the richest man in the world, he owned some steel plants. The most famous was Bethlehem Steel. And at one point, he wasn't as productive as he wanted to be. In fact, his whole team wasn't. So he went looking for help, and he found a productivity expert by the name of Ivy Lee. And so he and Ivy were chatting. Ivy came into his office, and Charles Schwab said, okay, what can we do? What can me and my team do to become more productive, to hit our goals? And Ivy Lee said, okay, you ready for this? I want you to write this down. He said, okay, I'm ready. Break it to me. And so Ivy Lee said, before you leave work today, I want you to list the 3 most important things you have to get accomplished tomorrow, and then go home. That's it. And when you come in the morning, start on number 1 and work on number 1 until you finish. Whatever you do, do not start on number 2 until you finish number 1. Once you finish number 1, move to number 2. Work on number 2 until it's done, then move to number 3. Work on number 3 until it's done. If you finish before the end of the day, make a new list of 3 more things and start on number 1. If you don't finish, then save your list, and the next morning, pick up where you left off. So, Charles Schwab, I think he was hoping for something a little bit more revelation, a little bit something that was a little bit more eye-opening. So he really wasn't that impressed. So as Ivy Lee was wrapping up, he was like, okay, whatever, how much money do I owe you? And Ivy Lee said, do this. I like you and your team to do this. And if you find it helpful, pay me whatever you think it's worth. So a few months go by. Ivy Lee doesn't hear a thing until one day he gets a check in the mail for $4,000. And at the time, that was more than a year's wages for the average worker. And when he talked to Charles Schwab said that was the single most beneficial productivity tip he had ever heard. In fact, later on, after he became the richest man in the world, someone interviewed him and he listed that tip as the single biggest productivity tip he had ever received. So it's all about planning tomorrow, today, coming in and focusing on one task at a time until we get it done. So think about that. When you come in every day, are you just simply being reactive and putting out fires, or are you spending some time working on the most important task? So good points about Charles Schwab and focusing on the most important, which leads us to plan ahead. Plan tomorrow, today. Plan next week, this week. You know, my wife and I have started having these Sunday night meetings where we're planning the next week. Just the communication, that little bit of 30 minutes, 45 minutes time that we spend, it smooths our week so well. We have a plan on who's in town, who's out of town, who's picking the kids up from school, who's taking them to dance, talking about plans, where, you know, what are our plans for the next 10 years, 5 years, 3 years. We're having those conversations on a weekly basis, and life is better. So plan your week ahead, plan your days ahead. Please tell me you're not coming in the mornings and looking at your calendar to figure out what you have to do that day. You should always plan tomorrow before you leave work today. So make sure you're doing that. Another person you might recognize is Richard Branson. So Richard Branson is currently one of the richest men in the world. And I believe the last time I heard his companies, he owns more than 305 companies. So you could say he's got his hands in a lot of pots. He's, again, ultra successful, and he's interviewed by many, many people. And during a recent interview, somebody asked him, they said, Richard, can you share, you know, one big secret or one big tip that you would give other people to help them be more productive, be more successful? So he thought for a minute, and he said, you know, if I had to pick just one tip, I would say exercise. And you say, really? Exercise? Is that true? Yes, that is completely true. In fact, studies have been done that said that if you exercise and then do anything that requires brain work, any mental work, you're more efficient, you're more productive. In fact, studies were done even on high school children and said that if they stood up, just the simple act of standing up while taking tests means that on average they scored a full letter grade higher. So if they would have made a C, now they were coming out with a B, or if they would have made a B, they're coming out with an A, just simply because they stood up. Just the simple act of standing up and getting that blood flowing helps them think more clearly. So if you start your days off with some exercise, again, what are we talking about with exercise? You need at least 30 minutes of cardio 3 times a week. So if you can't start there, that's okay. Start with 5 minutes. Start with whatever you can do, and then add a few minutes to it each week. And the goal is a minimum of 3 times a week, 30 minutes each time, cardio that's getting your heart up, getting your blood pumping. And again, it's been shown that any time of the day is better than nothing, but early mornings are the best. So do this in the morning if you can. So while we're talking about taking care of ourselves, some other points to remember are take breaks. You know, we can't just hard charge head down 100% of the time. You'll burn yourself out. In fact, it's also been shown through studies that after you get about 9 or 10 days into a workday, you actually become less productive. So there's a point in your workday where it makes more sense to go home and take a break and come back and work hard the next day. It becomes counterintuitive, it becomes counterproductive for you to work beyond a certain number of hours each day. Another thing, take your vacations. You know, in the businesses I've owned in the past, I'm shocked at how many employees would come to me in December and want to sell back vacation time, meaning that they didn't take it. Trust me, take this vacation time. You need that mental break. You know, when do your best ideas come to you? Is it when you're sending an email, or when you're working on payroll, or when you're knee deep into working on some technical issue at the office? No. Your best ideas typically come when you're not in the middle of a deep project at work. In fact, mine normally come to me when I'm in the shower, or when I'm driving, or when I'm on vacation. So take that time off, that mental break, that clarity break. You need it for your business and for your life. That's when your best ideas typically come to you. So make sure you're taking those clarity breaks. You're taking that vacation time. Another point, make sure you're getting plenty of sleep. You know, a gentleman that worked for me years ago, he and I, it was almost like we were bragging, discussing who got the less sleep each night. And he normally beat me. I would come in with 4.5, 5 hours, and he would be 3.5 or 4 hours of sleep. And it almost became a point of pride on who could survive on the least amount of sleep. And while it's true that we can survive on a small amount of sleep, you know, the human body is amazing. You can survive in some crazy circumstances, and little sleep is one of those. But that doesn't mean you're going to thrive. You know, you could probably run a race car on regular gas from the gas station, but it doesn't mean you're going to win any races. Same thing with your body. You can survive on 3 or 4 or 5 hours each night, but you're not going to win any races. You're not going to be functioning at peak capacity. So make sure you're getting plenty of sleep. It's been proven that the average person, that's the human, 30, 40, 50 years old, needs between 7 and 8 hours of sleep every night. And if you don't know how much sleep you need, just start experimenting. Sleep an extra hour and see how you feel. Then after a few days, add an hour and see how you feel. You can pretty quickly determine the optimal amount of sleep for you. There was another study done with high school students, and they took some basketball players, and they gave some of the basketball players 6 hours of sleep a night, and some they gave 9 hours of sleep a night. Those who had 9 hours of sleep a night scored on average 11 more points per game than the same student athletes that slept 6 hours a night. So again, sleep is a good thing. Make sure you're getting plenty of sleep. Some other tactical, so you'll notice the beginning of this webinar, we were talking more strategy, more where are we going. Now we're talking more tactically how we're going to get there. So again, the tools that we're talking about now, none of these things are foreign to me. I've had great success with some of them. I've had limited success with others, but I've had success with all of them. And what I would ask you is, don't feel like you have to try all of these. In fact, it would be overwhelming to leave this webinar and think you have to go implement 20 tactical steps to become more productive or more efficient or more effective. What I'd like you to do, if none of these are familiar with you, pick out one or two that kind of sound good, that seem like they might fit, and try them. The beauty is you've got the rest of your life. You can get a little bit better every day. We want to improve a little bit every day, so try something. If it works for you, keep doing it. If it doesn't, stop that thing and find something else. So I'm trying to give you plenty of options here. Again, plenty of tactical tools to use to become more productive, to reach your goals faster, to manage and really own your day. Because at the end of the day, either the day runs you or you run your day. I want you to run your day every day because that's how we hit our goals. So now, jumping into more of our tools, talking about the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, keeping things simple. You would probably be shocked how much time you spend on things that ultimately aren't getting you where you want to go. For years, I printed a newsletter. I wrote it. I wrote all the articles in it. I printed it. I had it printed on beautiful colored paper and stuffed in envelopes and mailed to clients. And after doing that for quite some time, and it was it took a substantial amount of time, but after doing that for a while, I found a company that would give me dedicated phone numbers. And so one of these phone numbers I started putting at the top of my printed newsletter. And that's the only place I put it. And the way this company worked, every day they monitored every phone number that they gave me. And they would track who called which number, how long was the call. They recorded every call so I could go back and listen to it. And it gave me kind of a weekly and a monthly rundown, a report of how often each number was called. So the number for my newsletter, I didn't watch it at first, but eventually I started watching it. What I noticed is after 12 months, that's 1 year of me printing newsletters, paying to have them printed and stuffed in envelopes and postage and mailed out. After doing that for a year, how many people do you think called that number? 0. In a whole year, not a single person called that number. So very quickly I was able to determine, Ryan, you don't need to be doing this. So ask yourself, are you doing things like that? Things that really aren't helping you reach your goals? If so, let's figure out where we're spending that time and spend it on something else. And a great way to do this, if you're not already doing it, is simply by tracking your time. So I've got some daily planners that I use that I really like. I've seen people do it on Excel spreadsheets. I started with Excel back in the day. You could even use an Outlook calendar if you wanted to. But whatever it is, whatever your tool of choice is, just track your day for a week or two. I'm not asking you to do this permanently, though there would be some benefit doing it long term. Just for this exercise, do it for a couple of weeks and do it in 15-minute increments. And what you'll notice is a couple of things. Number one, you task switch much more than you think. People think that we can multitask. In fact, we brag about that, how much we can multitask. But the human brain really doesn't multitask well. But we do task switch. We jump from one task to another, and we can do that very quickly. The problem is it's been shown that every time you switch task, your brain has to reacclimate to that task that you were working on, and so you lose so much efficiency that it's really not wise to task switch, to jump back and forth. So as you start tracking your time every day, you're going to notice that you jump back and forth a lot. So that's where we'll talk about time blocking here in a few minutes. But first of all, just track your time. You'll notice that you're probably switching more than you should. You'll also notice that you're probably checking email a lot more than you imagine. In fact, it's been shown that the average worker checks their email 44 times a day. That is ridiculous. We're not professional email checkers. You do not need to be checking your email that much. So you'll see some revelations once you start tracking your time. If you don't like pen and paper, if you don't like spreadsheets, there are plenty of applications out there now that will help you do it electronically. In fact, my previous company, a service company, we use software to track all of our employees because we wanted to track it for billability reasons and for utilization reasons. Most of these apps that you can use online, they have mobile apps now, so you can do it on a phone or a tablet. So there's really no excuse for not tracking your time. And again, I'm not asking you to do this for the next 10 years. I'm asking you to do it for 1 or 2 weeks. And then once you have those results, what do you do with them? Well, we can start off with our Eisenhower box. This is a little 4-quadrant box that President Dwight D. Eisenhower created years and years ago. Stephen Covey popularized it. But the real idea of the box here is that you have 4 quadrants. The top left is important and urgent. The top right is important but not urgent. The bottom left is not important and urgent. And the bottom right is not important and not urgent. So after you have a timesheet, after you have your list of all these tasks that you do, put them in these boxes and ask yourself, where does that item belong? If a client calls and they're having an emergency, we have a fire, well, that's important and urgent. So that goes in the urgent and important box. I like to call those your fires, things that you have to do. It's probably not the thing you'd like to be doing, but it's the thing you have to be doing right now. So that's your fires. Those are the things that you have to work on right now. Things that are important but not urgent, that's really where we want to live. Stephen Covey called this our quadrant 2 or quadrant 2 time. And I agree with him. He said you want to spend as much time as possible in quadrant 2, because if we do that, we're preventing fires. We're preventing something from becoming urgent. So if we can solve issues when they're important but not yet urgent, then they never become urgent, and our lives are just more peaceful. It's a little bit easier to live every day, and we have more time to devote to these most important things. What about the bottom left quadrant? Not important and urgent. That's a great place to delegate. Is this something we can send to other people? We'll talk about delegating a little bit later. And then finally, bottom right, not important and not urgent. Kind of like my newsletter. Why do I even need to be doing this at all? That's a great task to stop doing, to delete. So after you get your list of tasks, ask yourself, where does it fit into my Eisenhower box? Another great tool that we can use to kind of track our time is a free software tool called Rescue Time. You can install this on a desktop, on a laptop, and it literally tracks everything you do all day long when you're at your computer, and it categorizes it for you. So for example, social media, it may track that as entertainment. Now, if you are in the social media world, if you're a marketer and you spend a lot of your work hours working in social media, then you can tell Rescue Time, nope, when I'm in social media, I'm actually working, I'm being productive, and it will change that category from entertainment to business, so you can make it as accurate as you want it to be. But the beauty of this is that it's very simple to use. You simply install it, type in your email, and forget about it. And then on a weekly basis, it sends you a summary of what you spent your time doing. And you can see very quickly, it gives you the big number, 43, 57, 62. You can see how productive you were that week. It gives you this big productivity score. So Rescue Time, another great tool to use. One of my favorites is a tool called Kanban. Like I said, I used to be the to-do list master, and Kanban was one of my favorite ways to use the to-do list. Kanban has its root in Agile, which has its root really back in the productivity systems that we helped the Japanese implement after World War II. After the war, we sent a lot of our best productivity and process experts over to Japan to kind of help kickstart the economy. And this is really where some of this lean manufacturing and agile work came out of. So one of the concepts from there is Kanban. And the idea with Kanban is that you literally buy lots of sticky notes. And you take your whiteboard, I used a whiteboard, and you create this backlog section. And this is all the tasks that need to be done. This is your backlog, things that need to be done. Anything you can think of, write down one task on each sticky, stick it in the backlog. Then you have this work in progress section. These are things that you're actively working now, and you can never have more than 3 items in there at a time. So anything you're actively working on needs to be a work in progress. After that, if for some reason you hit a snag and you're waiting on somebody, you can move that to the waiting board. And then ultimately, once you finish it, you move it to the done section. And what I would do Every week at the end of the week on Fridays, I would take a picture of my board and then I would remove all my done items. It was kind of nice. I felt like I had accomplished something because I had all these done tasks. I could pull them off and see how much work I'd accomplished. Then I would come in on Monday mornings. My backlog would still be substantial because I had plenty of work to do, but my done box would be empty and I would start clean with new work in progress, new waiting, and go from there. What I later did, I started breaking down my backlog into shallow work and deep work, things that I could do, that anything that was going to take a substantial amount of brain power, that was going to take some serious thought, I would put that under my deep work. Anything that wasn't quite that substantial, I'd move it into shallow, and that was kind of my shallow versus deep work breakdown. If you like this idea, but you don't want to invest in Post-it sticky notes, then Trello is a great tool to use. It's basically an online version of Kanban. Here's a sample from the Trello website. You can move tasks from one board to the other. And so it's really a great kind of an online digital version of Kanban. So if you like that idea, but you want some technology to help, check out Trello. The free version does everything you would need. Another thing, you heard me mention delegate earlier. Do you have an assistant? That is one of the great tools you can use. Get an assistant. An assistant does not have to be expensive. I have 2 assistants. You can find assistants just about any place that are willing to help you with just about any task. You can hire individual one-time freelancers off Upwork or Fiverr. In fact, the website Fiverr is called Fiverr because when it started, all the work was $5. So you could get people to help you with different tasks for as low as $5. So look on there, graphics work, audiovisual, marketing work, anything from running to the cleaners to ordering food to helping you book travel to do bookkeeping. You could find an assistant to help you with just about anything. So ask yourself, could I benefit from having an assistant? If you go back to your Eisenhower box, how many tasks did you have that were in your delegate box, that lower left quadrant? So ask yourself, can I benefit from an assistant? Another great tool is Audible. Don't waste your drive time. So on average, my commute about 20 minutes each way every day. That's about 40 minutes every day. So 40 minutes a day times 5 days a week, that's about 200 minutes a week. That's over 3 hours. The average book on Audible is about 3 hours. That means that you can knock out a book a week. That means if you're not doing anything else, not changing any routine, not adding time at the beginning of the day or the end of the day to read, you can get through an extra 50 books a year just by using your drive time wisely. So use Audible. You can find books on just about any subject, any self-improvement, any business improvement subject you could imagine. You can find a book on Audible to help you achieve those goals. Another great tip, personally, I would find myself drifting as I would listen to audiobooks. I would start kind of mentally drifting. I just wasn't focusing on it. A tip that I learned that helped me, you can speed up Audible. You can, instead of playing it at 1 time speed, you can play it at 1.25 or 1.5 or 2 times the normal speed. And what I found is that by doing that, it kept me more mentally engaged because I was paying closer attention to the speaker. So if you find that you like audiobooks, but you kind of mentally start drifting into other subjects and daydreaming, speed it up a bit, and that will help. That's helped me, and I've heard it help other people as well. Another great tool, Orange Cone. So one of my old mentors, she was a very, very successful businesswoman. She also liked aerobics, and she taught an aerobics class before work most days. And she came to the office, she'd be head down, charging hard, and she constantly got distracted. Like you probably do, like I did for years. Constantly she was distracted. One day out of frustration, she looked down and noticed she had her gym bag from her workout class, and noticed in her gym bag she had some orange cones. So she grabbed one of those orange cones and she set it outside her door. Historically, she had closed her door, opened her door. She had tried everything and people kept barging in and distracting her. But for some crazy reason that day with the orange cone outside, no one interrupted her. And she kind of realized that she might be onto something. So she started using that cone a little bit more and a little bit more, and realized that that became her sacred time, her orange cone time. So if you need some time of your own, consider that. The orange cone can definitely work. Another great tool similar to that is blocking out distractions. I was working with a client a while back, and they were on the verge of getting rid of an employee who was just not being very productive, was not hitting the goals. So we pulled that employee in for an interview and talked to him. And they said, guys, my office is closest to the front door. I have this big glass window. I've been here forever, so I have a lot of institutional knowledge. You add all that up, and that means people knock on my door all day, every day. And she was right. I sat in there for a day or two. She got constantly distracted. And so we said, what could we try? Well, we tried closing the door. We tried talking to people. It still didn't really solve the problem. And she said, let's try some noise-canceling headphones. I said, really? She's like, yeah, I think that might help. It would help block the noise, and hopefully people would see that I have headphones on and they'd respect the privacy of that. And so we did, and it worked. A simple $250 pair of headphones saved her job. It saved, talking about productivity, her productivity went through the roof. The employer didn't have to go through the process of firing and trying to hire somebody to replace this very beneficial long-term employee, all because they were able to block out distractions. I personally have found this works great on airplanes too. Some studies have shown that for every hour you work in an airplane, you're able to do about 3 hours worth of real work because you can block out distractions. You don't have constant notifications and pings and emails coming in because you're up in the air. You're kind of secluded, and you can just put your head down and work. So I personally love the noise canceling headphones when I travel because I can get a lot more work done. Another guy you might notice or might recognize, this is Warren Buffett. So Warren Buffett is the richest man in the world. And one of my favorite Warren Buffett stories, I mentioned earlier, again, he said, yes is very expensive. You have to know when to say yes and when to say no. But my favorite Warren Buffett story has to do with this pilot. And so as you can imagine, being the richest man in the world, he's got some pretty good pilots. And this pilot in particular, that we're going to talk about today, had flown for presidents. I mean, this guy was good at his job, but he thought, I'm pretty good at my job, but hey, I've got Warren Buffett here. I don't want to lose this opportunity. So one day when he was flying Warren somewhere, he said, Mr. Buffett, he said, what tips could you give me? What help could you give me to help me achieve my goals? And Warren Buffett thought for a minute and said, okay, this is what I want you to do. I want you to list everything you want to accomplish in your life. At least hit a list of 15, 20 things. And don't do this haphazardly. Spend some time and really think about this. What are the most important things you want to accomplish for the rest of your life? Put your list together, and next time we see each other, we'll chat about it. And so the pilot did just that. He went home, put some serious consideration into his list, came back with his list of 20 items, and he was ready. Next time he flew Mr. Buffett anywhere, he broke out his list and said, hey, I've got my list. So Warren Buffett said, great, let's break out the list. Show me your list. So he opened the list and said, okay, I see you have these and they're listed in order like I told you to. Great. So he had started with the most important item first, down to the least important. And he said, okay, I want you to circle the top 3. And so the pilot circled the top 3, and he's like, what do you think those are? And he's like, well, I guess those are my most important tasks, the ones I need to start on first. Warren Buffett said, yep, you're right. What do you think the next 17 are? And he said, well, I guess those are my secondary items, the ones I'll work on when I have some spare time. Warren Buffett said, no, absolutely not. You're right. The first 3 are your to-dos, your most important tasks, your goals. But the next 17 are distractions. In fact, they are your not to-do list. Those are the things that you absolutely do not touch for any reason at any time because they are distractions and they'll distract you away from your top 3. So only focus on your top 3 until they're done. Then we can work on the next 3. But do not work on any more of the list until you finish your top 3. So I thought that was a very great lesson on focusing, working on your most important task. And as we start talking about focusing, let's talk about Pomodoro. Pomodoro is a really cool technique. And Pomodoro, by the way, is Italian for tomato, because the gentleman that came up with this idea, they started using a kitchen timer, and the kitchen timer was in the shape of a tomato. So they called their technique the Pomodoro Technique. So the idea is that, again, we don't focus very well most of the time because we're trying to multitask, which really turns into task switching. So the idea was, once we have the list of those top 3 things we want to accomplish for the day, how do we actually accomplish those? So what they found through lots of trial and error, lots of study, was that the average person can really focus hard for about 25 minutes at a time. So they had their timer, they set it for 25 minutes, and they worked hard on one task without taking a break, without looking up, for 25 minutes. At the end of that 25 minutes, they set a new timer for 5 minutes and they took a break for that 5 minutes. So that was one Pomodoro, 25-minute work cycle and a 5-minute break. And that was considered one Pomodoro. And you may say, well, hey, that's great. I work 8 hours a day. I can knock out 16 Pomodoros. No, they found that it's really hard to focus and work that hard for extended periods of time. Even the most productive people, on average, only get about 6 to 8 Pomodoros worth of real work done each day. What you'll find is when you get started, you're lucky to get 1 or 2. So if you start off when you're getting 1 or 2, work up to 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, work up to eventually you're getting 7 or 8 Pomodoros each day. So there's just some power in using that tactile timer, a timer sitting there on the desk in front of you. If you feel like you like the idea but you don't want to use a real timer, there's some web apps that work pretty well. So just go to your either iPhone or Android app store and search for Pomodoro. Plenty will come up. It's the same idea. You're doing a 25-minute work stretch with a 5-minute break, and that is one Pomodoro. Another issue, I guess you could say, tactical strategy, and I struggled with this for a long time, is the need to make things perfect. You know, I'm a recovering perfectionist, and I would literally spend hours and hours and hours on something to try to get it perfect. And it cost me, in many cases, it cost me a lot of time and energy that I really shouldn't have had to devote to the product. I can remember a time that I spent dozens and dozens of hours and thousands of dollars working on a product and completely perfected it, polished it. It was ready to go, 25 steps with everything you could imagine. It was a perfect product. I launched it, and only 2 people ended up buying the product. So after hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars, and dozens and 100 hours, it literally turned into a product that was useless. Within a few months, nobody was using it. So what I should have done was created that minimum viable product, launched it, found out if it had any traction, if it had any stickiness, if anybody really wanted that product, and then if they did, I could devote more time to it. But remember that you don't have to make everything perfect before you launch it. Perfect is definitely the enemy of the good. Another thing, we'll talk about time blocking. So what I've seen in some recent studies, it seems like ultra successful people are kind of moving away from to-do list and moving more towards time blocking. With time blocking, you are proactively blocking off time on your calendar for specific tasks. So for example, when I work with clients, we're always talking about their 90-day goals. We call these our rocks. These are the big things we have to accomplish these 90 days. And the problem is sometimes they don't get these tasks done. And when I ask them why, they say, I didn't have enough time. And I say, you've had 90 days and this was the single most important task. How do you not get your most important task done in 90 days? Because they didn't prioritize it. They didn't make time for it. And so what I then coach them afterwards, I say, okay, go back. Next week, put 1 hour on your calendar, just 1 hour for the whole week to work on your big goals. Do that for a week or two and then up it to 2 hours. Do that for a week, up it to 3 hours. And eventually you'll find, again, we're working in quadrant 2. We're being proactive. And by doing this, we're preventing fires in the future. So the more, it's kind of a strange phenomenon, but the more time you spend working on these goals, the more time you'll have. So start off time blocking. Block off time on your calendar and keep that time sacred. Don't let things interfere with the time that you've blocked off. So time blocking, check it out if you haven't already. Email. We mentioned email. 44 times a day the average person checks their email. Don't be that guy. I was that guy. Don't be that guy. Some other tips, don't check it first thing in the morning. Don't check it during your most productive time of the day. On average, you should check email about 3 times a day. Most people say check it around 10 or 11 a.m., check it around 1 or 2 p.m., and then check it before you go home at the end of the day. So don't feel like you have to be a slave to email. Chances are you were not hired to be a professional email responder. So ask yourself, why am I really here? Don't feel like you have to be on email. In our society, it's pretty common. A common email etiquette is a 24-hour response time. So in most cases, nobody's going to get mad at you or beat you up if you don't respond to them within 5 minutes. So don't feel like you have to check email 24 hours a day. To that point, turn off notifications. If you use an email client like Outlook, turn off pop-ups, turn off noises, turn off notifications altogether. You don't need dings or crashes or bells. You need that turned off. which really the best thing to do is after you check your email, close Outlook. Just shut it down. That way you don't have pop-ups. You're not tempted to just hop back over and look at it. I used to have multiple monitors, and one of those monitors always had Outlook up and running. Don't do that. Shut it down when you're done. The next thing, while you're using your email, use rules and quick steps. Rules can help you sort email or even sort email automatically for you. Quick steps are the same way. For years and years and years, I had a very elaborate email folder system. You could break it down by year, and then was this a client, a vendor, an employee, and then I had multiple folders under each of those for location. It was a pretty substantial folder structure inside Outlook. So when I would get an email, it could take me 10, 20, 30 seconds just to file it away when I was done with it. Well, you know what? Outlook over the last decade's become pretty good at indexing and letting you sort and search email. So you really don't need that elaborate structure. Most people don't, at least. So I created a quick step that just said archive. So now when I have an email, if I want to keep it, I simply press one button, archive. It marks it as read, it moves it to that archive folder, and I'm done with it. So with quick steps, you can set up little rules to help you automatically do 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 things by the pressing of one single button. So check out quick steps and rules if you haven't used those before. Another tool, delay delivery. So for example, sometimes I would know, okay, if I email this person, it's just going to be back and forth. It's going to be volleying all day with email. So I would intentionally send them an email, but I would use delay delivery and schedule it to go out at 5:05 p.m. And that way the message could be sent after I was gone for the day, and I wouldn't be tempted to check it all day, every day. So you can use delay delivery if you want to. It's also cool if you want people to think you're working real hard. You can schedule emails to go out at 2 or 3 a.m. So use delay delivery if you think that would be helpful. There are some times and places for it. Again, touch each email only one time. I used to have the bad habit. I would see an email and say, oh, I need to do something with that, and then I would skip it and go to the next. And that meant I was touching each email 2, 3, 4 times. Again, that's very inefficient. So whenever you have it, again, don't check email all day. When you do check email, give yourself time to really check email and then touch it once. Either figure out, do I need to delete this? Do I need to file it away? Or do I need to act on it? And whatever you need to do it and then move to the next email. But don't just simply touch it over and over and over again. That's how you hear about these people with 5,000, 10,000 messages in their inbox. Don't be that guy. So touch it once, archive it if you need to. Another great tool that I've used for a long time, a tool called SameBox. Microsoft has tried to do some of this using their technology called Clutter. But personally, I've just never been in love with the Microsoft Clutter tool. SameBox, though, does this very well. With SameBox, it's basically a tool that filters your email before it gets to your inbox. And it adds a few more folders to your inbox. So for example, it adds a folder called Sane Later. And these are for things that may be important, but they're not urgent. So for example, anything that is sent to multiple people, it assumes that that's not urgent. It drops it to Sane Later. Anything that, for example, if you're on a newsletter and you're getting, coupons from Abercrombie & Fitch, it'll drop that into that Sane Later, meaning, yeah, you might want to read this, but it's not important right now. And it leaves only the most important emails in your inbox. It's also super intelligent. So once you move an email, it remembers that, and in the future, it always puts that type of email in that type of folder. You can also create a folder called Sane Later 7 days or Sane Next Week, meaning that if you move an email into that folder, it disappears and it automatically is resent to you 7 days later. That comes in very handy. There's a folder it adds called Sane Black Hole. With Sane Black Hole, any email you move into that folder, you'll never get another email from that sender again, and they'll never be notified, so just simply those emails go away. It deletes them before you ever see them. So some really cool tools in SameBox. I think it's about $5 a user a month. I think that's right. I haven't checked the price in a while, but it's very inexpensive for what it does. Another tool, this might be the very most important tool. It's the easiest while at the same time potentially being the toughest tool to use. It's just 3 simple words. Just say no. Again, back to Warren Buffett. Yes is very expensive. You got to learn to say no. The most successful people say no more than they say yes. They know their why. They're committed to the why, they know where they're going, and they say no to everything else. So you got to say no. Another thing, end of day routine. Have a routine. Like we talked about a morning routine. Productive people have morning routines. Productive people also have end of day routines. So how do you wrap up your day? Again, do you like to read? Do you like to journal for a few minutes? It has been found that using technology before bed is generally not a good idea. In fact, most studies show now that the blue light given off from cell phones and tablets and laptops can stimulate your brain to the point that it makes it harder to fall asleep. Most experts say don't use these technologies within about an hour before you want to go to bed. I've also done some studies, and it seems that you're sleepier during the day when your body's at its highest temperature and at its lowest temperature. For example, early afternoon, it's one of the times your body's at its highest temperature on average, so you get sleepy early afternoon. That's pretty common. But you can kind of automatically trick your body or force your body to drop its temperature by taking a shower. And your body temperature seems to be lowest about 90 minutes after a shower. So if you want to go to bed at 10 p.m., take a shower about 8:30. It kind of helps you start winding down and your body temperature will start dropping. So little tools like that, develop your own end of day routine, whatever works for you, and stick to it. Another thing I love to talk about is procrastination. Don't procrastinate. Again, so many times we know what to do and we don't do it. So to really talk about the value of procrastination or how much it can cost you, let's play a little game. Let's just say I want to hire you. I've got a project coming up. It's going to take 31 days, so about 1 month to do this project. And it's pretty good work. I think you'd like the work. It's perfectly aligned with your skill set, so you'd be able to do the work with no problem. Here's the catch though. The first day I want to pay you 1 penny. The second day though, you get a raise. I'll double it to 2 cents. The third day, I'll double it again to 4 cents. So for 31 days, I'll double your pay every day. So starting off, I'll pay you a penny, and then every day I'll double that. And at the end of 31 days, the job's done. Would you take the job? Seriously, would you take this job? Well, most people say no. And when they say no, I smile and say, well, I'm glad you didn't take that job because it would have cost me $21 million to hire you like that. And if you don't believe my math, you can double check it right here. This shows you a few things. Number one, it shows you the power of compound interest, how much numbers can simply add up by simply increasing them regularly. But also the power that it shows you is the power of procrastination. If you said, Ryan, I want to do this, but I only want to work 30 days. I don't want to work 31. I want to wait 1 day. I'll put this off 1 day. Well, if you're working 30 days instead of 31, you're not losing the penny. You're not losing it from the first day. You're dropping off the last day. That's the $10 million day. So simply by dropping this 1 day, you're dropping your $21 million to $10 million. That means by procrastinating 1 day, you're cutting the value of this job in half. So think about that. If today you know what you need to do, but you're procrastinating, it's not costing you a day of your current wages or a day of your current skill set. It's costing you a day of your wages 10, 20, 30 years from now. That means that could be 10. You could be earning 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times more in 30 years than you are now. So don't procrastinate. If you know something that needs to be done, do it. Don't wait. Do it, do it, do it. Which brings me back to one of my favorite Jim Rohn quotes of all time. Everyone must choose one of two pains, the pain of discipline or the pain of regret. You know, I had an exercise physiology teacher back in college that said it the same way. We all love to be healthy. We love to look good, but very few people love to go to the gym. And she would always say, Ryan, you know, you can either hurt a little bit every day, meaning that, you know, you're just sore from going to the gym and working out and exercising. She said you could be a little sore every day for the rest of your life, or you can feel pretty good for the next 10 or 20 years, but then not be able to move for the last 20 or 30, meaning that if you procrastinate, in the end, you're going to pay a lot more. So again, discipline. It's all about discipline. You've got to get disciplined with everything you do. So if you like any of this and you want to learn some more, by all means, reach out to me. I love to talk about this, one of my favorite subjects. Also, some of my favorite reading recommendations: Get a Grip, The Miracle Morning, Getting Things Done, The Perfect Day Formula, Deep Work, Eat the Frog, Time Management Made Simple. Some of my favorite books regarding time management, time ownership, being productive, being effective and efficient. And again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. I've got a Facebook group that is perfect for types of questions like these, so you can join our Facebook group. You can also shoot me an email personally. Again, I love to talk about these topics. So I hope that helps, and I will talk to you next time.